A rare call broke the silence of a luxurious hallway. A simple gesture revealed a hidden talent beneath a common uniform. What was meant to be a warning became the beginning of a personal revolution, and fate, with surgical precision, brought together two opposite worlds. Before you discover this unbelievable turn, subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove life always surprises those who keep dreaming. Sophia Mitchell adjusted her name badge on her purple uniform as she pushed the cleaning cart down the mirrored hallway of the Imperial Palace, a five-star hotel that stood majestically in the heart of New York City's financial district. Each movement was carefully calculated, as if the luxury surrounding her might shatter with a single careless breath. While organizing the scented towels, Sophia discreetly checked her watch. She had 2 hours left in her shift and needed to clean 7 more suites. After that, she would cross the city on 2 crowded buses to reach her advanced Dutch class. The bags under her eyes betrayed nights spent poring over grammar books and verb conjugations. "Sophia, room 712 is ready for cleaning. The guest just left for breakfast," announced Marlene, the head housekeeper, over the radio. "I'm on my way," replied Sophia, quickly adjusting the bun that held back her brown hair. Suite 712 was the most luxurious on the floor, with a view of Central Park. Sophia cleaned with the precision of someone who knew every inch of that space. While changing the Egyptian cotton sheets, her gaze caught a book on the nightstand, International Business and Corporate Diplomacy, a title that seemed to mock her own interrupted journey. 3 years earlier, Sophia had graduated with honors in international relations from NYU. She spoke fluent English, Spanish, French, and now was studying Dutch with stubborn determination. The plan was simple: secure a position at the Dutch consulate that would open applications in the coming months. It was her chance to resume the path she had been forced to abandon when her family's financial problems compelled her to trade unpaid internships for jobs that paid the bills. After finishing the room, Sophia allowed herself a moment of weakness. She sat on the soft leather armchair for a few seconds, closed her eyes, and imagined that this was her own suite, that the world beyond those windows was her professional territory. The shrill ring of her cell phone interrupted her fantasy. The display showed Professor Van Dyke. "Hello," answered Sophia in a low voice, nervously glancing at the door. The conversation in Dutch flowed naturally. Her diction was so perfect that any native speaker would have difficulty identifying her accent. On the other end of the line, the Dutch professor couldn't contain his enthusiasm. "Uitstekend, Sophia. Gefeliciteerd. Excellent, Sophia. Congratulations. You were the best in the class on the proficiency exam. I've never seen anyone reach this level in such a short time." Sophia felt her heart race. Her trembling hand gripped the phone. "Echt? Wow, really?" she asked, her voice choked with emotion. "The embassy will certainly be impressed with your score. I have contacts there who can help you with the selection process." A stubborn tear escaped from the corner of Sophia's eye. 3 years of evening studies, saving every penny for tuition, sleeping only 4 hours a night. Finally, a tangible result. "Thank you well, Professor. Thank you very much," she said, quickly wiping her face with the sleeve of her uniform. What Sophia didn't notice was the male silhouette standing at the half-open door of the suite. Edward Carson, owner of the Imperial Palace and an international hotel chain, observed the scene with curiosity. At 42, Edward had an eye trained for details, and a maid speaking fluent Dutch, a language few Americans mastered, was certainly a detail worth noting. Sophia hung up the phone and immediately returned to her duties, perfectly adjusting the silk curtains. When she turned to leave, Edward had already discreetly moved away down the corridor. "Mr. Carson," greeted Marlene with a nervous voice upon seeing him in the hallway. "We didn't know you'd be here today." "Surprise visit, Marlene," he replied, with a polite smile, but his eyes followed Sophia's silhouette as she pushed her cart to the next room. "Is that new employee?" "Sophia? She's been with us for almost 2 years now. One of our best, sir. Very discreet and efficient." Edward nodded thoughtfully. "I'd like you to bring her file to my office tomorrow." "Is there a problem, sir?" asked Marlene, concerned. "On the contrary, Marlene. Just a curiosity." The next morning, Sophia was called to the executive office immediately after clocking in. Her heart raced as she rode the executive elevator. Had she been caught using her phone during work hours, or sitting in that armchair for a few seconds? The hotel rules were clear and strict. The secretary led her to a spacious office with floor-to-ceiling windows. Edward Carson was standing, observing the city sprawled below. "Sophia Mitchell," he said, turning to face her. "Please sit down." Sophia obeyed, maintaining a rigid posture on the edge of the chair, like someone ready to receive a warning, or worse. "Dutch is a fascinating language," Edward commented casually, leaning on the glass desk in front of him. "Moeilijk maar fascinerend, difficult but fascinating." Sophia's eyes widened slightly. He spoke Dutch too. "You speak Dutch?" she asked, trying to maintain her composure. "Just enough to survive meetings in Amsterdam," Edward smiled briefly. "Nothing comparable to your fluency, which from what I heard yesterday is impressive." Sophia felt her face warm. "Mr. Carson, I'm sorry if I broke any rules by answering the phone during—" Edward raised his hand, interrupting her. "Why would someone with a degree in international relations, fluent in how many languages?" "4. 5 counting Dutch," replied Sophia, hesitantly. "Why would someone with those credentials be cleaning rooms in my hotel?" The question had a genuinely curious tone without judgment. Still, Sophia felt diminished. "Necessity, sir. And dignity. There's no dishonor in honest work." Edward smiled, genuinely this time. "I completely agree, Ms. Mitchell. In fact, I myself started as a towel boy in a third-rate hotel." Sophia relaxed a little, feeling less vulnerable. "I read your complete resume. Internship at the UN, exchange program in France, extension project on US-Netherlands relations. Impressive." Edward walked to the window again. "Exactly what I'm looking for." "What do you mean?" Sophia furrowed her brow, confused. "We're expanding the Carson hotels to Europe. The Netherlands, Belgium, and Germany are our first targets. I need someone who understands not just the languages, but the culture, customs, business etiquette, and primarily someone who knows intimately how our hotels operate." Sophia blinked several times, slowly processing what this meant. "I'm offering you the position of executive assistant for international expansion. The salary is 5 times what you currently receive, plus benefits and frequent travel to supervise new properties. Interested?" The proposal was so unexpected that Sophia felt her body go cold. It was as if all the sacrifices of the past few years converged to this impossible moment. But why me? Surely there are more qualified professionals. No one with your unique profile, top-tier academic training, linguistic fluency, and practical knowledge of the inner workings of a 5-star hotel. Plus, Edward made a significant pause, "I noticed you have something that can't be learned at any university: resilience and perseverance." Sophia tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. Her hands trembled slightly. "I need an answer by the end of the week. If you accept, you'll start next month after intensive training." Edward extended a folder with the contract. "Read it carefully. Consult a lawyer if you prefer." Astonished, Sophia received the folder. When she finally found her voice, she asked, "And the Dutch consulate? I heard there will be a selection soon." Edward observed her with renewed interest. "That's your decision, Sophia. Government diplomacy or corporate diplomacy. In both you would represent America abroad." Leaving the office, Sophia felt the world spin. In the locker room, away from prying eyes, she finally allowed herself to cry, not from sadness, but from pure disbelief. For the first time in years, the future didn't seem like a narrow, suffocating path, but a horizon opening with possibilities. That night, in her tiny apartment in the New York suburbs, Sophia called her mother in the small town in Pennsylvania. "Mom, you won't believe what happened today." As she recounted the details of the proposal, Sophia gazed out the window at the lights of the city that never sleeps. Somewhere in that urban constellation, Edward Carson was contemplating the same city, unaware of how that decision would forever change not only Sophia's professional life, but the very fate of his hotel empire and his personal life. In the following weeks, the purple uniform was replaced by elegant suits. The corridors she once cleaned became runways for her new responsibilities. The world was about to meet Sophia Mitchell, not as the maid who dreamed of distant horizons, but as the woman who would conquer every inch of them. The reflection in the mirror seemed to belong to someone else. Sophia adjusted the impeccably tailored navy blazer over the silk shirt, feeling the fine, unfamiliar fabric against her skin. Her fingers, once rough from constant contact with cleaning products, now displayed well-manicured nails. Her hair, previously always tied in a functional bun, fell in soft waves over her shoulders. "You can do this," she whispered to herself, trying to calm the whirlwind of insecurities consuming her. The first day as executive assistant for international expansion at Carson Hotels would begin in less than an hour. Too abrupt a transformation not to cause vertigo. 3 weeks of intensive training had prepared Sophia technically, but nothing could prepare her for the social chasm she was about to cross. When the executive taxi, sent by the company, stopped in front of the simple building where she lived, Sophia felt the curious gazes of her neighbors. The same entrance through which she passed, unnoticed, now witnessed her metamorphosis. In the car, she mentally reviewed the day's agenda: strategic meeting with the expansion team, lunch with Dutch investors, and in the afternoon, an exclusive session with Edward Carson himself to discuss the architectural project for the first European hotel in the chain. "Good morning, Ms. Mitchell," greeted the receptionist at the luxurious central office of Carson Hotels. "Mr. Edward left instructions to direct you straight to the meeting room on the 20th floor. The executives are already waiting." Sophia took a deep breath, trying to disguise her nervousness. "Thank you, Claire." The panoramic elevator rose silently, offering an impressive view of the city. Sophia couldn't help thinking that until a few weeks ago, her daily view was the interior of luxury bathrooms she meticulously cleaned. Now she contemplated New York from above, as if the city was also at her feet. The elevator doors opened directly onto a large meeting room. Around a noble wooden table, 5 men in suits conversed in low tones. Edward Carson, noticing her presence, immediately stood up. "Gentlemen, allow me to introduce Sophia Mitchell, our new executive assistant for international expansion," he announced with a warm formality that surprised Sophia. 5 pairs of eyes assessed her with expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism. Sophia immediately recognized the game that was beginning. She would need to prove her worth every minute from now on. "Good morning, gentlemen," she greeted with a firm voice, extending her hand to each of them. The last executive squeezed her hand with unnecessary force. "Richard Mercer, Financial Director. Impressive, your meteoric rise in the company, Ms. Mitchell." The condescending tone didn't go unnoticed. Sophia held his gaze without hesitation. "Thank you, Mr. Mercer. I hope my work continues to impress you positively." Edward indicated the empty chair to his right. "Sophia, I've prepared detailed material on our current operation and projections for Amsterdam. I'd like everyone to hear your analysis of the necessary adaptations for the Dutch market." Without warning, he handed her a thick folder. A test, clearly. Sophia opened the document and found graphs, spreadsheets, and an extensive market report. The room plunged into silence as everyone awaited her failure. Mentally, Sophia thanked the countless nights studying hotel occupancy reports and international market trends, preparation she had done on her own during training. After a few minutes analyzing the documents, she looked up. "Allow me to be direct, Mr. Carson. These numbers are promising, but they underestimate 2 crucial factors in the Dutch market," she began, pointing to a specific table. "First, the cultural seasonality in the Netherlands is distinct from American patterns. The projected peak occupancy periods don't account for significant local events like King's Day and the Tulip festivals." Richard Mercer shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Second, the premium service model that works perfectly here will need substantial adjustments. The Dutch concept of luxury differs from ours. They value sustainability and functional minimalism above ostentation. I suggest revising these parameters before finalizing the architectural project." The silence that followed had a different weight now. Edward smiled discreetly, exchanging glances with the Director of International Operations. "Exactly the observations I made last week during my call with the European consultants," commented Edward. "Let's continue the meeting with these considerations in mind." The next 3 hours were a continuous test of endurance. Sophia absorbed information, contributed precise insights, and above all, demonstrated that her cultural knowledge about the Netherlands went far beyond language. When the meeting finally ended, she felt exhausted but visibly victorious. "Impressive for the first day," commented Edward when the other executives had left the room. "But don't delude yourself, Sophia. Richard won't be your only challenge. Most people here still see you as an intruder." "I know," she replied simply, organizing her notes. "I'll be judged twice for every decision and idea. I'm prepared for that." Edward observed her with a mixture of admiration and curiosity. "The Dutch investors arrive in half an hour for lunch. They are traditionalists. I'd prefer to accompany you on this first contact, but unfortunately I have another unavoidable commitment. Are you comfortable handling them alone?" Sophia felt her stomach sink, but maintained a serene expression. "Perfectly comfortable. What's the main objective of the lunch?" "To present Carson Hotel's vision for the European market and, most importantly, make them feel culturally respected." The restaurant chosen for the meeting occupied the top 2 floors of a historic building in the financial center. Sophia arrived 15 minutes early, reviewed the menu, and made a point of meeting the sommelier. When the 3 Dutch businessmen entered the establishment, she greeted them with a genuine smile. "Welkom in New York, heren," she greeted them in perfect Dutch. "Ik hoop dat u een aangename vlucht had. I hope you had a pleasant flight." The easy expression of surprise on the faces of the 3 men was worth every hour of night study. The lunch flowed naturally between conversations in English and Dutch. Sophia demonstrated knowledge of the Dutch tax system, Amsterdam's architectural trends, and even the preferred wines from the Zeeland region, where one of the investors was from. By the time dessert was served, the atmosphere was one of evident approval. "Ms. Mitchell, I confess I came to this lunch with conservative expectations," commented Willem van der Meer, the oldest of the investors, "but it's refreshing to meet someone who understands that international business is, above all, about cultural bridges." "Thank you, Mr. van der Meer. Carson Hotels believes our expansion should deeply respect the particularities of each market. We don't just want to build hotels in the Netherlands, but create spaces that the Dutch themselves recognize as authentically aligned with their values." At the end of lunch, Willem handed her his personal card. "My wife is a curator at the Rijksmuseum. When you're in Amsterdam for the feasibility studies, it would be a pleasure to host you for a private tour. I believe Dutch art can offer excellent insights for the hotel's decorative project." "It would be an honor, sir." Back at the office, Sophia found Edward in an informal meeting with the architect responsible for the Dutch project. Seeing her, Edward interrupted the conversation. "So, how did it go?" "The Van der Meers are on board. Willem invited me for a private tour of the Rijksmuseum during our technical visit," replied Sophia, trying not to sound too proud. Edward couldn't hide his surprise. "Willem van der Meer, the same one who cancelled 3 meetings with me citing cultural incompatibility." "The very same," confirmed Sophia with a discreet smile. "I believe they now see the project differently." The architect, a middle-aged man with thick-framed glasses, looked at Sophia with renewed interest. "If I may, Miss Mitchell, I'd love to hear your impressions of contemporary Dutch architecture. I'm trying to convince Mr. Carson to incorporate elements of the Dutch design movement into the project." For the next hour, Sophia surprised herself by contributing significantly to technical discussions about the future hotel's design. It was as if her entire previous life, her studies, the sleepless nights, even her work as a maid, converged to this moment, providing her with unique perspectives that neither Edward nor the renowned architect possessed. When the day finally ended, Sophia was exhausted but strangely invigorated. She returned to her small apartment, carrying folders and documents to study throughout the night. She needed to be even more prepared for the next day. However, something had changed within her. The painful self-consciousness of someone who didn't belong in that world was beginning to dissipate. Sophia realized that perhaps her greatest asset was having lived on both sides, that of scented towels and that of corporate strategies. As she prepared a simple instant ramen for dinner, there was still no time for proper shopping. Her cell phone rang. It was Edward. "Sophia, sorry to call outside work hours. I just received an email from Willem van der Meer. He suggested we advance the technical visit to Amsterdam. In fact, he specifically insisted that you should go next week to meet with some local suppliers." Sophia almost dropped the pot. "Next week? I know it's sudden, but it's a unique opportunity. Willem rarely gets personally involved in projects. Can I count on you?" "Of course, sir. I'll be prepared." "Excellent. My secretary will arrange everything tomorrow." "Oh, and Sophia," Edward paused, "congratulations on your first day. You exceeded all expectations." When she hung up, Sophia allowed herself a moment of pure euphoria. Her small apartment became the stage for an awkward celebratory dance that ended in tears of relief. In a week, she would be in Amsterdam, not as a tourist or student, but as a representative of one of the largest hotel chains in America. That night, before sleeping, Sophia sent a message to her mother. "Mom, remember when you told me that God writes straight with crooked lines? I think he's using a very expensive pen to write my story now. I'll call you tomorrow with incredible news." What Sophia didn't yet know was that the trip to Amsterdam would be just the beginning of a much greater transformation. As she fell asleep over the documents she was studying, Edward Carson remained in his office, observing the illuminated city. On his laptop screen were Sophia's professional profile and notes from the day's meeting. For reasons he himself didn't yet fully understand, Edward knew there was something special about this young woman who, until recently, had been pushing a cleaning cart through the corridors of his hotel. Something that went beyond her impressive professional skills or her unwavering determination. What he didn't imagine was how this intuition would forever change not only the course of his business, but also the paths of his heart. The canals of Amsterdam reflected the grey October sky like undulating mirrors. Sophia observed the city through the taxi window, absorbing every detail. The narrow, tall houses with their characteristic facades, the bicycles multiplying through the streets, the boats gliding silently along the canals. It wasn't her first time in the city. She had done an exchange for 6 months during college, but it was the first time she arrived as an executive, with a responsibility that made her stomach contract with anxiety. The Hotel Pulitzer, where she would be staying, was a complex of 25 historic 17th century houses, connected and transformed into a luxury hotel. While checking in, Sophia couldn't help but note the irony. Less than 2 months ago, she had been cleaning rooms like the one she would now stay in. "Miss Mitchell, Mr. van der Meer left a message for you," informed the receptionist, handing her a wax-sealed envelope. "And these arrived for you an hour ago." A bouquet of fresh tulips accompanied the envelope. Sophia thanked him with a smile, heading to the elevator. Entering the luxurious room, she allowed herself a few seconds of amazement before opening the envelope. "Welcome to Amsterdam, Ms. Mitchell. My wife Annika awaits your visit to the Rijksmuseum tomorrow at 10 a.m. A dinner at our home is scheduled for 7 p.m. A driver will be at your disposal. Willem van der Meer." Sophia checked the clock. It was 2 p.m. in Amsterdam, 9 a.m. in New York. She still had a few hours before jet lag would hit her full force. She decided to use the time to review the documents she had brought and prepare for the meetings over the next few days. After a quick, refreshing shower, she sat at the desk with her laptop and spread out architectural plans, market reports, and profiles of the main Dutch stakeholders. The site chosen for the future Carson Amsterdam was in the Jordaan region, a historic neighborhood that blended tradition and modernity, exactly the positioning the brand sought in its European expansion. A knock on the door interrupted her concentration. It was the concierge with a package delivered by the local architecture firm. "Thank you," thanked Sophia, taking the robust box containing models and material samples. 2 more hours passed as Sophia immersed herself in the technical details of the project. When her phone rang, she almost jumped out of her chair, so absorbed was she. "Hello?" she answered automatically in English. "Sophia, it's Edward. Sorry for calling at an inconvenient hour, but I wanted to confirm you arrived safely." Edward's voice had a different tone, less formal, more personal. "I arrived a few hours ago. Mr. Vandermeer already sent an invitation for the museum tour tomorrow and a dinner at his home." "Impressive," commented Edward. "I tried for 2 years to get a personal connection with the Vandermeers without success." "You managed it in one lunch." Sophia smiled, feeling a pang of pride. "I believe it's more about the right timing than any personal merit." "Don't diminish yourself, Sophia." Edward's voice took on a serious tone. "Recognizing and valuing your own achievements isn't arrogance, it's self-awareness." The comment caught Sophia off guard. It was as if he had read an entire chapter of her insecurities. "Thank you," she responded simply. "Well, I won't take up any more of your time. Have a great visit to the museum tomorrow. Anneke Vander." Meer is an authority on Dutch art. Take advantage of this opportunity. When she hung up, Sophia realized she was smiling. There was something in Edward's tone, a combination of confidence and gentleness, that made her feel simultaneously challenged and supported. The next morning, after a night disrupted by jet lag, Sophia wore an elegant outfit in neutral tones, sophisticated without being ostentatious, respecting the Dutch aesthetic that favored elegant functionality over exuberance. The Rijksmuseum was an imposing building that housed masterpieces by Rembrandt, Vermeer and other Dutch masters. In the main hall, Sophia was greeted by a tall woman with grey hair and impeccable posture. "Ms. Mitchell, I am Anneke Vandermeer. Welcome to my second home." The private tour was a true lesson in Dutch history and culture. Anneke showed not only the famous works, but also architectural details of the museum itself, and lesser-known pieces that revealed fascinating aspects of Dutch society through the centuries. "Look at this Vermeer painting," pointed Anneke to a painting where a woman was reading a letter near a window. "What strikes you most about it?" Sophia observed carefully before answering. "The light. It's extraordinary how he captures the natural light entering through the window and illuminating the interior." Anneke smiled, satisfied. "Exactly, the Dutch relationship with natural light is almost sacred, perhaps because we live under cloudy skies much of the year. Dutch design has always prioritized maximizing natural light in spaces. It would be an important element to consider in the hotel project." Sophia mentally noted the observation. This was exactly the kind of cultural insight that wasn't in business manuals. At the end of the tour, Anneke led Sophia to the museum cafe for a light lunch. "Willem told me about your unusual trajectory," commented Anneke as they savored artisanal sandwiches. "From maid to international executive in a matter of months. Fascinating." Sophia felt her face warm. It was an unexpected opportunity. "I don't believe in luck, Ms. Mitchell. I believe in people who are prepared when opportunities appear." Anneke made a significant pause. "And in perceptive people wise enough to recognize unconventional talents like your boss." "Mr. Carson has a different vision of talent management," agreed Sophia. "And of talented women, apparently." Anneke sipped her tea. "I met Edward Carson a few years ago at a tourism conference in Brussels. He always seemed like an intelligent man to me, but very traditional in his choices." Sophia didn't know how to interpret the comment. "We're looking forward to his visit next week," Sophia diverted. "He'll come for the final meeting with the architects and investors." "Yes, Willem mentioned it. It will be a pleasure to host him for dinner as well." Anneke smiled. "Now, dear, let's discuss the real reason I invited you for this private tour." Sophia furrowed her brow, intrigued. "The future Carson Hotel will be built in a historic Amsterdam neighborhood. This is not just a commercial venture, but an intervention in our cultural heritage." Anneke's eyes gained intensity. "I would like to understand your vision for this project. How do you plan to honor our tradition while bringing Carson Hotel's American identity?" The question was deep and complex. Sophia realized she was being tested not just as an executive, but as someone with cultural sensitivity to understand what was really at stake. For the next hour, Sophia and Anneke discussed everything from architectural features to hospitality philosophies, creating bridges between Dutch tradition and American exuberance. By the end, Annika seemed genuinely impressed. "Ms. Mitchell, I believe you are exactly what this project needed," she declared, rising. "We await you tonight for dinner." The rest of the day was filled with technical meetings with suppliers and visits to the site where the hotel would be built. When Sophia finally returned to the hotel to prepare for dinner, she was exhausted, but strangely energized. The Van der Meers residence was a classic canal house on the prestigious Herengracht. The driver helped Sophia out of the car, and she admired for a moment the narrow, elegant 17th century facade. The interior revealed a perfect balance between historical preservation and contemporary comfort. Willem greeted Sophia with warm hospitality, introducing her to the other guests, important figures from Amsterdam's cultural and business scene. During the exquisite dinner, Sophia charmed those present with her knowledge of Dutch art and her vision for the hotel. Her fluency in the language broke down barriers, and her genuine admiration for the local culture won allies. "So, Ms. Mitchell," asked one of the guests, the director of a major investment bank, "what was a talented young American doing as a maid before this opportunity?" An awkward silence fell over the table. Sophia felt Annika's gaze upon her, as if measuring her reaction. "I was building a knowledge base that no university could provide," replied Sophia calmly. "Knowing a business, from its most basic gears, offers perspectives that an MBA could never teach." Willem raised his glass in a silent toast, clearly approving the response. When the evening ended, Annika accompanied Sophia to the door. "You are an extraordinary woman, Sophia Mitchell." She used her first name for the first time. "I have the impression that your impact on Carson Hotels will be far beyond this project in Amsterdam." Sophia thanked her, not knowing exactly how to interpret that observation. The next 5 days were a whirlwind of meetings, technical visits, and strategic lunches. Sophia felt herself blossoming professionally, as if every cell in her body was finally in the right place. The initial insecurities dissipated as she saw her ideas being incorporated into the project and her cultural suggestions received with enthusiasm by the Dutch partners. On the eve of Edward's arrival, Sophia was in her hotel room finalizing a presentation when her phone rang. It was him. "Good evening, Sophia. Or rather, good evening there in Amsterdam." "Good evening, Mr. Carson. Everything is ready for your arrival tomorrow." "Great. The feedback I've been receiving about your work is exceptional. The Van der Meers are delighted." Sophia felt her face flush with the compliment. "Thank you, they have been extremely receptive." "I have a special request for tomorrow," continued Edward after a brief hesitation. "I'd like you to meet me at the airport. We need to talk before the official meetings." "Of course, sir. What time does your flight arrive?" "Around 7 a.m. and Sophia," he paused, "you can call me Edward when we're outside the formal work environment." Before she could respond, he continued, "I have a surprise that I think you'll like. See you tomorrow." That night, Sophia had difficulty sleeping. She mentally reviewed all the project details, imagining questions Edward might ask, worried about not disappointing. But there was something more, a restlessness that had nothing to do with work. The next morning, Sophia waited in the airport's arrival area at Schiphol. When Edward emerged through the gate, she noticed he looked different, less formal, with a cashmere sweater under his blazer instead of the usual tie. His eyes found hers immediately, as if he knew exactly where to look. "Officially welcome to Europe, Sophia," he greeted her with a warm smile. "How do you feel after a week representing Carson Hotels internationally?" "Like I've found my place," she replied with sincerity. As they walked to the waiting car, Edward explained that he wanted to visit the site where the hotel would be built. "Before any formal meeting, I want to see the location through your eyes first," he said, without interference from architects or investors. In the car, they talked about the project's progress. The dynamic between them had subtly changed. Edward treated her not as a subordinate, but as an intellectual partner, asking her opinion on strategic decisions and listening attentively to her cultural observations about the Dutch market. When they reached the Jordan, they left the car and walked along the cobblestone streets to the site where the future Carson Amsterdam would be built. The space consisted of 3 contiguous historic buildings that would be interconnected and renovated internally, maintaining the original facades. "It's perfect," murmured Edward, observing the buildings and their surroundings. "I can visualize exactly what we imagined in the plans. The corner allows a view of the canal, and that century-old tree will provide a special framing for the restaurant," pointed Sophia, sharing the vision she had developed during the week. Edward observed, her with a different look, more personal. "You've really connected with this project, haven't you?" "Completely," she admitted. "It's as if every detail makes sense, as if it were your destiny to be here," completed Edward, almost in a whisper. The moment was broken by the ring of Sophia's phone. It was Willem confirming lunch. "We need to go," she said, returning to a professional posture. "The Van der Meers are eager to see you again. Before that, I have something for you." Edward took an envelope from the inner pocket of his blazer and handed it to Sophia. Confused, she opened the envelope and found an official letter from Carson Hotels. "Is this the promotion?" she asked, perplexed as she began to read the contents. "Director of International Expansion for Europe," confirmed Edward, "with a permanent office here in Amsterdam." Sophia felt her legs weaken. "But I've only been with the company for 2 months. It's deserved," interrupted Edward firmly. "You transformed a problematic project into a success case in record time. The Dutch trust you. Our international team respects your decisions, and He paused, choosing his words. "I've believed in your potential since the day I heard you speaking Dutch in that hotel room." Sophia couldn't contain her emotion. Silent tears ran down her face as she tried to process the magnitude of this change in her life. "Thank you for your trust," she whispered finally. "I won't disappoint." "I know you won't," replied Edward, his voice carrying a note of emotion that went beyond the professional relationship. For a brief moment, they stood there, in the middle of an Amsterdam street, as if the world around them had paused. There was something growing between them, something that transcended hierarchies and corporate conventions, something that neither was prepared to name yet. "Let's go," said Edward finally, checking his watch. "The Van der Meers are waiting for us, and we have an entire future to build." As they walked side by side through the streets of Amsterdam, Sophia thought about how life could change so radically in such a short time. From the solitude of the corridors, she clinged to international recognition, from invisibility to leadership. And now a new chapter was opening, not just in her career, but possibly in her heart. What she didn't yet know was that the true transformation was just beginning, and that beyond the canals of Amsterdam, beyond international hotel projects, a destiny was being woven that would unite her life with Edward Carson's in ways neither could predict. 6 months passed in the blink of an eye. Dutch spring was blooming, tinting Amsterdam's parks with vibrant colors that contrasted with the predominant gray of the rigorous winter that had just departed. Carson Hotels now occupied an entire floor in a restored historic building near Dam Square, in the heart of the city. Sophia observed the view from her office window. Her reflection in the glass revealed a different woman from the one who had arrived in the Netherlands half a year before. More sophisticated haircut, confident posture, determined gaze. The external metamorphosis merely reflected the internal transformation she had experienced. "The quarterly reports just arrived, Ms. Mitchell," announced Marika, her Dutch assistant, placing a folder on the mahogany desk. "Thank you, Marika. And please call me Sophia, we've already talked about this." The young Dutch woman smiled timidly. "Sorry, it's a habit. Oh, and Mr. Carson confirmed his arrival for tomorrow. Should I reserve the driver to pick him up at the airport?" Sophia felt that familiar contraction in her stomach at the mention of Edward's name. "That won't be necessary. I'll pick him up myself," she replied, keeping a casual tone. Over the last 6 months, Edward had visited Amsterdam 4 times to monitor the project's progress. With each visit, the dynamic between them became more complex. Professionally, they were a perfect duo. He with his comprehensive strategic vision, she with her cultural sensitivity and meticulous attention to detail. The international team watched admiringly how they could perfectly complement each other's thoughts during meetings, as if sharing a silent language. But beyond the meeting rooms, beyond the construction sites and negotiations with suppliers, something was growing that neither of them was ready to name. Dinners that extended into the early hours in discussions about art, philosophy and personal memories. Seemingly casual walks along the canals that ended with hands meeting accidentally. Glances that lasted a second longer than professional protocol would allow. Sophia had established a life in Amsterdam. She had rented a charming apartment in the De Pijp neighborhood, made friends in both the local and international communities, and completely mastered the city's routine. Edward, meanwhile, remained divided between the United States and the growing international operations of the chain, always having New York as his base. Sophia's phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. Sophia Mitchell. "Good afternoon, or rather, good evening there," Edward's voice sounded from the other end, bringing with it that unmistakable warmth she secretly yearned for. "Edward, I was just reviewing the reports before your arrival. Actually, I called about that. I'll arrive a day earlier. My flight lands tonight around 10 p.m. Sophia felt her heart race. "Is there a problem?" "No, I just managed to advance some meetings in New York. I thought we could have a day to review everything calmly before the official presentations. Of course, I can ask Hendrik to—" "Actually," interrupted Edward, "I'd prefer if it were just you. We have important matters to discuss, in private." Something in his tone aroused both anxiety and expectation in Sophia. "I'll be at the airport at 10 p.m. After hanging up, Sophia tried in vain to concentrate on the reports. What did Edward want to discuss in private? Would it be issues related to the project, her performance as director, or— She pushed the thought away, mentally reprimanding herself for allowing personal hopes to interfere with her professional judgment. At 9:45 p.m., Sophia waited in the arrival hall at Schiphol Airport. She had exchanged her corporate suit for a casual, elegant dress, a subtle but significant change. The flight landed punctually, and soon Sophia spotted Edward's familiar figure emerging through the gate. Upon seeing her, he smiled in a way that seemed reserved exclusively for her. "Amsterdam continues to do you good," he commented as a greeting, placing a lingering kiss on her cheek. "The city has that effect on people," replied Sophia, suddenly feeling as shy as a teenager. In the car on the way to the hotel, they talked about the project's progress. Carson Amsterdam was taking shape rapidly, with an inauguration planned in 8 months. The costs were within budget, and European media interest in the first American chain's foray into the continent grew each week. "The Vandermeers confirmed their presence at tomorrow's dinner," informed Sophia. "Annika has been an invaluable ally. Thanks to her, we gained access to exclusive antique suppliers for the decoration." "You conquered Amsterdam in a way I never could have alone," acknowledged Edward, his gaze fixed on the city's nightlights passing by the window. "This project is already more yours than mine." There was something different in his voice, an uncommon melancholy that Sophia didn't miss. "Is everything okay, Edward? You seem worried." He hesitated for a few moments before answering. "Just tired from the trip. We can talk better tomorrow with a clearer mind." Sophia nodded, respecting his space, although an uneasiness persisted. The next day, after an intense morning of meetings with the local team, Edward suggested they have lunch together away from the office. They chose a small cafe on the banks of a canal, frequented mainly by locals, one of Sophia's favorite places in Amsterdam. "I like it here," commented Edward, observing the unpretentious but cozy environment. "Nothing like the ostentation of the restaurants where I usually have meetings. It was one of my first discoveries when I moved. I come here when I need to think, or simply observe the city life flowing," replied Sophia, serving herself the traditional Dutch herbal tea. For a few minutes, they chatted about trivialities, Amsterdam's weather, Dutch cultural peculiarities. That still surprised them. Funny stories about cultural adaptation. There was an underlying tension, as if both carefully circumvented a more important subject. Finally, after a prolonged pause, Edward placed his cup on the table with determination. Sophia, I received an offer to sell Carson Hotels. The statement fell like a bomb. Sophia felt the air escape from her lungs. Sell? To whom? Why? The Lux International Group, a European conglomerate. They're offering a considerable amount, more than I ever imagined receiving. Edward looked directly at her. They're particularly interested in the European expansion you're leading. Sophia tried to process the information, struggling to maintain professional composure while feeling her personal world crumble. Is that what you wanted to discuss in private? Have you made the decision? No, he replied emphatically. It's a decision that impacts many lives, including yours. That's why I'm here a day early. I wanted your sincere opinion, not as a Carson director, but as Sophia. The distinction didn't go unnoticed. It was the first time Edward explicitly separated their professional roles from their personal relationship. What would happen to the Amsterdam project? To the team we've built? She asked, trying to maintain a practical focus while organizing her thoughts. Lux guaranteed to keep the entire team, especially you. In fact, they're offering an even higher position in their international hierarchy. Sophia felt a sharp pang in her chest. Edward was considering not just selling the company, but passing it on as if it were just a business, when for her it had become much more than that. And you? What would you do after the sale? Edward looked away, fixing his gaze on the movement of the canal. That's the most complicated part. I'm tired, Sophia. I built this empire practically alone, sacrificing relationships, personal life, everything. Part of me yearns for a different life. What kind of life? Asked Sophia softly. A life where I can wake up without 50 urgent emails, where I can enjoy breakfast without 3 teleconferences, where I can... He hesitated, his eyes meeting hers. Where I can be with who really matters. Sophia's heart raced. It was the clearest hint Edward had ever given about his personal feelings. Edward, you've built something extraordinary. Carson Hotels carries your DNA, your vision. Are you sure you're ready to hand that over to others? That's the question that's kept me awake for weeks, he admitted. On one hand, the financial offer is tempting. On the other, as you said, it's my legacy. Sophia took a deep breath, organizing her thoughts before speaking. May I share something personal? Edward nodded, intrigued by her tone. When you found me cleaning that hotel room, I was exactly at my own crossroads. I had received a letter from the Dutch consulate about the next selection, and was gathering courage to leave the hotel job and risk everything for that opportunity. I was afraid, but at the same time, I knew I needed to follow my heart. Shide paused, taking a sip of tea before continuing. What I mean is, sometimes what appears to be just a business decision is in fact a decision about who we want to be going forward. It's not just about Carson Hotels, but about Edward Carson. The words hung between them, laden with multiple meanings. Edward observed her with an almost physical intensity. Sophia, there's another reason for this early visit, he said finally, his voice low and controlled. Something I need to confess. At that moment, Sophia's phone rang insistently. It was Marika, her assistant. Sorry to interrupt your lunch, Sophia, but the architects from Rijkswaterstaat are here for the meeting about the canal structural licenses. They moved up the time and insist it's urgent. Sophia looked at Edward, torn. These are the final environmental licenses. Without them, construction could be delayed for months, she explained, covering the microphone. Go, said Edward with an understanding smile. We'll continue this conversation later. The afternoon passed in a marathon of technical meetings. Sophia tried to maintain professional focus, but her mind kept returning to the interrupted conversation. What did Edward want to confess? And how did she really feel about the possible sale of the company? Around 6 p.m., when she finally managed a moment of privacy in her office, Sophia found a small envelope on her desk. Inside, a handwritten card from Edward. Have dinner with me tonight? Just the two of us. Before tomorrow's commitment with the Vandermeers, I passed by Prinsengracht and saw a small restaurant called Café Ludwig. Meet you there at 8 p.m. to continue our conversation. Sophia felt her heart race. The choice of location wasn't a coincidence. Café Ludwig was known for its romantic atmosphere, frequented mainly by couples. At exactly 8 p.m., Sophia entered the cozy restaurant. Rustic decor, candles on the tables, low lighting, and soft classical music created an intimate atmosphere. Edward was already waiting at a discreet table in the back, next to a lit fireplace. "You look stunning," he said, rising to greet her, his eyes admiringly taking in the emerald green dress she had chosen. "Thank you for giving me an excuse to wear something besides corporate suits," she joked, trying to ease the tension she felt. The dinner began with light conversations, recollections of moments shared over the past months, funny stories about cultural adaptation, observations about how the project had evolved. The red wine selected by Edward helped relax the atmosphere, but Sophia could feel there was something greater hovering between them. After dessert, Edward finally returned to the afternoon's subject. About the proposal to sell Carson, he began, slowly twirling the wineglass between his fingers. "I realize today that I can't make that decision without being completely honest, with myself and with you." Sophia waited in silence, feeling they were on the verge of a decisive moment. "When I promoted you to the International Directorate, many questioned my decision. Richard Mercer went so far as to suggest there were personal motivations involved." Edward paused, carefully choosing his words. "At the time, I vehemently denied it. I told him and myself it was a purely strategic decision." His eyes met Sophia's with renewed intensity. "I was lying. Not to them, but to myself. Sophia, since that day I heard you speaking Dutch in that hotel room, something changed in me. It wasn't just professional admiration, it was—" He hesitated. "It was as if I had found a part of myself I didn't even know I was looking for." Sophia felt the air catch. Edward Carson, the relentless businessman whose name was synonymous with success and determination, was opening his heart in a way she had never imagined possible. These last months, each visit to Amsterdam, each prolonged meeting, each walk along the canals, "I invented professional excuses to be near you." He laughed softly, as if mocking himself. "I who never needed excuses to do what I want." "Why are you telling me this now?" asked Sophia, her voice almost a whisper. "Because the sale proposal forced me to face the truth. It's not just about business, it's about us." Edward extended his hand across the table, gently touching her fingers. "If I sell the company, I won't be your boss anymore. There will be no more hierarchy between us, no ethical conflict." Sophia felt tears forming in her eyes. "And if I say, I don't want you to sell, that I believe in what we've built professionally, as much as," she hesitated, "as much as in what's growing between us, then I'll have to find another path," replied Edward with determination. "Because one thing became clear to me. I can no longer pretend that what I feel for you is just professional admiration, and I can't risk losing you for fear of corporate complications." The silence that followed was charged with emotion. Years of carefully constructed barriers crumbled between them. "I'm afraid, Edward," Sophia finally confessed, "afraid that people will say I got where I am because of this connection between us. I worked so hard to prove my worth, and you proved it. To everyone, including me." Edward gently squeezed her hand. "No one who has worked with you would question your competence or dedication." Sophia discreetly wiped away a tear that had escaped. "What do we do now?" Edward smiled, that rare and genuine smile she realized was reserved only for moments of true happiness. "First, I refuse the Lux International offer. Carson Hotels is not for sale." Sophia couldn't contain a sigh of relief. "And then," he continued, "we restructure the company's governance. I create an independent administrative board that oversees executive decisions, including mine. You continue as international director, reporting directly to the board, not to me." It was an elegant solution that preserved both their professional integrity while opening space for something new in their personal lives. "And us?" asked Sophia, finally allowing herself to verbalize the question that had hung between them for months. "Us?" Edward slid his fingers gently up her arm. "We start again. Not as boss and employee, not as mentor and protégé, but as Edward and Sophia, two adults who found something rare amid spreadsheets and business meetings. As they left the restaurant, they walked slowly along the canal banks, the reflection of the city lights dancing on the dark water. Amsterdam's spring brought with it an air of renewal that seemed perfectly synchronized with the moment they were living. "You know what's funny?" commented Sophia, as they walked hand in hand for the first time without pretense. "If I had gotten that position at the consulate, we would never have met like this." Edward stopped, turning to face her under the soft light of an antique lamppost. "Maybe yes, maybe no. I like to think that some encounters are inevitable, they just await the right moment." And there, under the starry sky of Amsterdam, Edward Carson finally did what he had desired for months. He leaned in and kissed Sophia Mitchell, not as her boss or mentor, but as a man who had unexpectedly found love in the corridors of his own hotel. What neither knew that night was that fate still held a twist that would test this newly declared love, a revelation that would emerge in the next 24 hours and put to the test not just their feelings, but everything they had built together professionally. Morning dawned clear in Amsterdam, with the spring sun filtering through the curtains of Sophia's apartment. She opened her eyes slowly, recalling the events of the previous night with a mixture of euphoria and apprehension. The kiss by the canal, the sincere confessions, the promise of a new beginning. Everything seemed almost dreamlike in the daylight. Her phone vibrated on the nightstand. It was a message from Edward. "Good morning. Still trying to convince myself that yesterday wasn't a dream. Breakfast at Bakker and Zoon at 9 a.m. before the meeting with the shareholders?" Sophia smiled, quickly typing an affirmative response. The dynamic between them had changed, but the professional commitments remained. Today would be a decisive day for the Amsterdam project, the final presentation to the shareholders before the conclusive construction phase. As she got ready, Sophia reflected on how to balance this new personal reality with professional responsibilities. Edward had proposed a structural solution for the company, but she knew that external perception would be a constant challenge. The corporate world rarely forgave women who became involved with their superiors, regardless of merit or circumstances. Exactly 9 a.m., Sophia entered the small artisanal bakery where Edward was waiting. He rose as he saw her, a genuine smile illuminating his face. "I imagined you might be nervous about today's meeting," he commented, after a discreet kiss on her cheek. "No more than usual," replied Sophia, though both knew this was not an ordinary day. During breakfast, they deliberately kept the conversation focused on professional topics, as if testing their ability to separate newly discovered emotions from corporate responsibilities. The plan was to meet the shareholders at 10:30 a.m. at the Carson Amsterdam office. "I received an interesting email this morning," commented Edward, as they walked to the office. "From the Rijksmuseum." "Did Annika send something?" asked Sophia, curious. Actually, it was from their archive department. Apparently they're doing an exhibition on international entrepreneurs and their connections with Dutch art. They want to include Carson hotels for our commitment to incorporating local artistic elements in the Amsterdam project. That's wonderful. Invaluable cultural credibility for the brand. Yes, but the most interesting part was what they found in their research. Edward paused, as if carefully choosing his words. They discovered a historical connection between my family and Amsterdam that I myself was unaware of. Sophia looked at him intrigued, but before she could ask more, they arrived at the Carson Amsterdam building, where Marieke was anxiously awaiting them in the lobby. "Sophia, Mr. Carson, the shareholders have already arrived and are in the conference room," she announced, visibly nervous. "And Mr. Mercer is here too. He arrived from New York this morning." Sophia and Edward exchanged concerned looks. Richard Mercer, the financial director, was not scheduled for this meeting. "Interesting," murmured Edward. "Well, let's go." The conference room was full when they entered. The main Dutch shareholders, including Willem van der Meer, the architects responsible for the project, and, strategically seated at the opposite head of the table, Richard Mercer, with a folder of documents in front of him and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Edward, What a pleasant surprise to find you here so early. I thought your flight would only arrive today, commented Richard, rising for a formal handshake. I advanced my schedule to review some important details with Sophia before the presentation, replied Edward calmly, though Sophia could sense the tension in his voice. The question is, what brings you to Amsterdam, Richard? This wasn't on your agenda. Richard opened a calculated smile. Urgent financial matters I prefer to handle personally. After all, we're investing millions in this project. Willem van der Meer, sensing the tension in the environment, intervened diplomatically. Before we begin, I'd like to express how impressed we are with the progress. Sophia has been an exceptional leader, perfectly integrating Carson's vision with our local culture. Sophia thanked him with a nod while noticing Richard's penetrating gaze upon her. There was something predatory in that look, as if he were awaiting the perfect moment to attack. The presentation began as planned. Sophia conducted the first part, detailing the current status of the project, the innovations implemented, and the updated timeline. Edward complemented with the global strategic vision of the European expansion. The synergy between them was evident. They naturally completed each other's thoughts, moving around the room with a shared confidence that impressed those present. When they reached the financial section, Richard asked to speak. If I may, I'd like to present some additional data that brings perspective to the project. The tone made Edward narrow his eyes, but he nodded, yielding the floor. Richard rose slowly, distributing copies of a report he had brought. Ladies and gentlemen, there's no doubt the Amsterdam project is impressive. On paper, Ms. Mitchell certainly has a talent for captivating presentations. His condescending tone made Sophia press her lips together. However, as financial director, I have a duty to present certain risks we've identified. He projected a series of graphs on the screen. Our independent analysts point out that the projected return on investment is dramatically optimistic. The estimated occupancy rates ignore the growing competition in Amsterdam's luxury sector, and the operational costs are significantly underestimated. Sophia felt her blood freeze. Those numbers completely contradicted her careful analysis. That is absolutely incorrect, Richard, she intervened, keeping her voice firm despite the indignation. These data don't correspond to the projections validated by 3 independent consultancies. Richard smiled coldly. Perhaps Ms. Mitchell is emotionally compromised with this project, an understandable phenomenon when someone is catapulted from the position of maid to international executive in a matter of months. A tense silence fell over the room. Some shareholders exchanged uncomfortable glances. Edward rose slowly, his expression unreadable. Richard, I think you're confusing. Those present, could you specify exactly what you're insinuating? The financial director widened his smile, evidently satisfied at having achieved his objective. Just raising questions about the objectivity in the analyses presented, considering special circumstances. He made a calculated pause. After all, last night our CEO and the Director of International Expansion were seen in quite an intimate situation by the Prinsengracht Canal. Sophia felt her face burn, so they had been observed. Probably Richard had arrived earlier than announced and followed them. Willem van der Meer cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable with the direction of the meeting. Gentlemen, I don't believe personal matters should interfere with our evaluation of the project. I completely agree, replied Richard promptly. But when multi-million-dollar investment decisions may be influenced by personal relationships, it's my fiduciary duty to alert shareholders about possible conflicts of interest. Edward remained impassive, studying Richard as if truly seeing him for the first time. Interesting, your concern with transparency, Richard, he finally said, his voice controlled. Since we're talking about conflicts of interest, perhaps this is the appropriate moment to discuss your secret meeting with representatives of the Lux International Group last week. In New York? It was Richard's turn to pale. I don't know what you're talking about, he replied, though his voice betrayed uncertainty. Edward walked calmly to his briefcase, removing a sealed envelope. I intended to discuss this in private, but since you've brought personal issues to this table, he opened the envelope, spreading photographs across the table. These are images of you entering the office of Lux's CEO, followed by messages intercepted by our security systems. The photographs clearly showed Richard in what appeared to be clandestine meetings. You were negotiating personal commissions to facilitate the sale of Carson Hotels, continued Edward, his voice now laden with disappointment. 5% of the total transaction value, correct? A considerable amount for someone who should be protecting this company's interests. Richard opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His face rapidly went from pale to intense red. I was just exploring market options. Edward slowly shook his head. Gentlemen, he addressed the shareholders, as I informed Sophia yesterday, I received a purchase offer from Lux International. I was considering the offer, as any responsible businessman would. But thanks to our corporate intelligence team, we discovered that Richard was negotiating in parallel, using privileged information for his own benefit. Richard rose abruptly. This is ridiculous. You're diverting attention from the real problem here, your personal involvement with a subordinate. The silence that followed was dense as fog. Sophia felt the world spin around her, but maintained an upright posture, a firm gaze. Months of hard work, of repeatedly proving her worth, seemed to crumble in the face of sordid accusations. It was Willem van der Meer who broke the silence. If I may make an observation, said the elderly Dutchman, adjusting his glasses, we Dutch have a tradition of pragmatism in business. We judge results, not personal circumstances. He turned to Sophia. Ms. Mitchell, in 6 months under your leadership, the project that was stagnant has gained momentum, cultural credibility, and operational efficiency. Whatever your relationship with Mr. Carson, it doesn't diminish your unquestionable professional merit. Sophia felt a wave of gratitude for the unexpected support. As for Mr. Mercer, continued Willem, now with calculated coldness, parallel transactions without transparency are unacceptable in any business context, especially in the Netherlands. If this evidence is confirmed, I suggest an immediate review of his position in the company. Richard seemed to have shrunk in his chair, his face now a mask of impotent fury. Edward took the floor again with renewed authority. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the dramatic deviation in our agenda. If you allow me, I'd like to clarify some things definitively. He paused, looking at each person in the room. First, Carson Hotels is not for sale. After careful consideration, I formally refused the Lux International offer last night. He turned to Richard. Second, considering the evidence presented, you are suspended from your duties while an independent audit investigates your actions. Finally, his gaze met Sophia's, softening almost imperceptibly. Third, regarding Ms. Mitchell and questions raised about our personal relationship, Edward took a deep breath. Yes, there is a relationship that transcends the professional. It began recently, and we intended to officially communicate it to the board after implementing structural changes that would eliminate any conflict of interest. Sophia held her breath, surprised by the absolute transparency Edward had chosen. To avoid any appearance of impropriety, he continued, we are immediately implementing a restructuring in corporate governance. Ms. Mitchell will report directly to the administrative board, no longer to me. Additionally, all her performance evaluations and decisions related to compensation will be conducted by an independent committee. The meeting continued for another hour, gradually returning to the technical matters of the project. When it finally ended, Sophia felt emotionally exhausted, but strangely light. The truth was exposed, not in the way she had imagined, but at least there were no more secrets or insinuations. Richard left quickly, without addressing anyone. The shareholders, after the initial surprise, seemed to have accepted the explanations and measures proposed by Edward. The Amsterdam project would proceed as planned. When everyone had left, with only Sophia and Edward remaining in the conference room, he finally allowed himself a deep sigh. This wasn't how I imagined our first day as whatever we are now, he commented with a tired smile. I think complicated would be a good definition, replied Sophia, trying to ease the tension with humor. Edward approached, gently holding her hands. I'm sorry you were exposed that way. Richard was always ambitious, but I never thought he would go to this extent. You knew about his negotiations with Lux? I suspected. That's why I moved up my trip and asked the security team to investigate. Edward shook his head. The irony is that if he had waited, I might have really considered the sale. It was our conversation yesterday that changed my perspective. They remained silent for a few moments, absorbing the morning's events. What happens now? Sophia finally asked. Now, Edward checked his watch. We have a lunch scheduled with Anneke van der Meer at the Rijksmuseum. Remember I mentioned something about a historical discovery? Sophia nodded, curious about what could be so important for Edward to mention it at that moment. An hour later, they were at the elegant museum restaurant. Anneke received them with her usual discreet elegance, accompanied by an elderly gentleman, carrying an old portfolio. Sophia, Edward, this is Hendrik Visser, our chief archivist. He has something fascinating to show you. After the formal introductions, Hendrik carefully opened the portfolio on the table, revealing documents yellowed by time. When we were researching business connections with Dutch art for our exhibition, we found something intriguing in the 19th century immigration records, explained the archivist, adjusting his glasses. An American family named Carson, who lived in Amsterdam for almost 2 decades before returning to the United States in 1897. Edward leaned in, genuinely surprised. My family never mentioned Dutch connections. The interesting thing, continued Hendrik, is that the patriarch, Anthony Carson, worked as a caretaker in this very museum during the Great Renovation of 1885. Sophia felt a shiver run down her spine. She clearly remembered Edward mentioning that his grandfather had been a caretaker. But the most extraordinary thing is this. Hendrik carefully turned a page, revealing an old sepia photograph. Anthony's wife, Maria Carson, was one of the first women to work in the museum's administration, despite being an immigrant. Here she is in 1890 in the International Visitors Department. The photograph showed a young woman with delicate features, dark hair tied in a formal bun, wearing what appeared to be a museum uniform. She began as a cleaning woman, explained Anneke, closely watching Sophia and Edward's reactions. But her talent for languages quickly led her to an administrative position. She spoke 5 languages, something extraordinary for a woman of that time, especially an immigrant. Sophia felt Edward's eyes on her, intense and emotional. There's more, continued Hendrik. In the diaries of the museum director of the time, we found mentions of a romance between Maria and Anthony that caused some institutional discomfort, given that he was a subordinate employee when they met. Edward took Sophia's hand under the table, gently squeezing it. Eventually, they returned to America to raise their family. According to our records, they had 3 children, the youngest named Edward. My grandfather, murmured Edward, his voice choked with emotion. He always told stories about his parents, about how they met working together, but he never mentioned the Netherlands. Perhaps because they left the country when he was very young. Sophia watched Edward absorb that revelation, seeing in his eyes the impact of discovering that his own family history mirrored, almost supernaturally, the recent events of his life. It's extraordinary, commented Anneke, her perceptive eyes alternating between Sophia and Edward, how destiny sometimes draws perfect circles through generations. The lunch continued with Hendrik, sharing more details about the Carsons' life in 19th century Amsterdam. Edward was visibly moved, asking questions about every aspect of his ancestors' life in the Netherlands. I'd like to visit the places where they lived, he commented, to better understand this part of my history that remained hidden for so long. It would be a pleasure to organize a historical tour for you, offered Anneke. The family's residence records are preserved in the municipal archives. When lunch ended, and they said goodbye to Anneke and Hendrik, Edward and Sophia walked through the museum in contemplative silence, occasionally stopping to admire the works of Dutch masters. It's almost mystical, isn't it? Sophia finally commented, as if somehow we were destined to repeat a century-old story. Edward nodded thoughtfully. My grandfather always said that certain love stories are so powerful. They echo through generations. I never fully understood what he meant until now. They stopped in front of a Vermeer painting, where the soft light from a window illuminated the interior of a 17th-century Dutch house. Sophia. Edward turned to face her, his eyes reflecting the same golden light as the painting. I don't know what the future holds for us, professionally or personally. I only know that discovering you cleaning that room, speaking a language I barely understood, was the most significant moment of my life, as if something dormant within me finally awakened. Sophia smiled, feeling tears form in her eyes. Perhaps your grandfather was right. Perhaps some stories are destined to happen, no matter how many centuries pass. Which makes me think... Edward paused, his eyes shining with a sudden idea. The Amsterdam Hotel. What if we modified the concept? How so? Instead of just another luxury hotel, we could create something that celebrates these connections between cultures, between past and present. A space that tells stories of personal transformations, of talents discovered in unexpected places. Sophia felt the familiar wave of creative enthusiasm they always shared in their best professional moments. A hotel where every detail reflects journeys of discovery, she completed, already visualizing possibilities. Where art, architecture, and service celebrate the transformations that occur when different cultures meet. Exactly, exclaimed Edward, his face illuminated with genuine excitement. In honor of Anthony and Maria Carson, and of us. In the following weeks, the Amsterdam project was completely reimagined under this new vision. The international team embraced the concept with renewed enthusiasm. The Van der Meers became passionate advocates of the idea, opening doors for cultural partnerships that previously seemed impossible. Richard Mercer resigned after the audit's conclusion, which confirmed his parallel negotiations. The administrative board was reshaped, including independent members with international experience in corporate governance. 6 months later, on a sunny autumn morning, Sophia walked through the almost completed Carson Amsterdam Heritage Hotel. The scaffolding had been removed, revealing the immaculate restoration of the historic facades. Inside, artisans gave the finishing touches to environments that elegantly blended American and Dutch elements. Each suite told a different story. Of cultural encounters, the main restaurant was called Maria's in honor of Edward's great-grandmother. The library, filled with volumes on immigration history and international art, bore the name Anthony's Study. Edward found Sophia in what would be the hotel lobby, a majestic space dominated by a skylight that bathed the environment with natural light, a tribute to Vermeer's fascination with luminosity. "What do you think?" he asked, watching her absorb the details of the space. "It's perfect," replied. Sophia moved. "It's as if each element tells a part of our story without needing to explain it in words." Edward smiled, gently pulling her close. "You know what else is perfect?" He pointed to a specific spot in the lobby, an elegant corner near the windows overlooking the canal. "That's exactly where we decided to place the reception desk, where guests will be greeted." Sophia observed the space, confused. "And what's special about that?" According to the records Hendrik found, it was exactly there that the service entrance was located where Anthony and Maria first met in 1885, explained Edward, his eyes shining. The beginning and end of a perfect circle. Sophia felt the magnitude of that moment, as if past, present, and future converged at a single point of perfect harmony. "From maid to international director," she murmured, recalling her journey. "Who would have thought?" "I would," replied Edward with conviction. "From the first moment, I just didn't know I was repeating the story of my own great-grandfather." A month later, at the official inauguration ceremony of the Carson Amsterdam Heritage Hotel, Sophia and Edward received guests from around the world. The international press acclaimed the innovative concept as a new paradigm in cultural hospitality. Anneke van der Meer, cutting the inaugural ribbon alongside the couple, whispered to Sophia, "Some places are more than buildings. They're meeting. Points between destinies. This hotel is one of those rare places." That night, after the celebration, Sophia and Edward escaped for a few moments to the hotel's presidential suite. From the balcony, they contemplated Amsterdam's illuminated canals, the city that had intertwined their destinies in ways they could never have imagined. "A toast," proposed Edward, raising a glass of champagne, "to the past we didn't know, to the present we built, and to the future we create together." Sophia toasted, her heart overflowing with gratitude. Who could have imagined, she reflected, that cleaning rooms would lead me here? "I've always believed that true luxury isn't in objects, but in the stories they witness," replied Edward, embracing her, "and our story has just begun." The next morning, the Carson Amsterdam Heritage Hotel opened its doors to the public. The first guest to sign the registry was a young employee of the American consulate, newly arrived in the city to begin his diplomatic career. He was personally received by Sophia, who, noting his nervousness with the new country, offered him a personal tour of the surroundings after her shift. And so, invisible to those present but palpable to those who knew the story, a new circle began to form, perpetuating the tradition of personal transformations and meaningful encounters that now defined not just a hotel, but the legacy of two families, united by destiny through centuries. Dear listeners, we hope that Sophia and Edward's journey has touched your hearts. This extraordinary transformation, from maid to international director, reminds us that destiny often works in perfect circles, connecting past and present in stories that transcend generations. To continue this emotional experience, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating narratives about personal transformations and life-changing encounters. You can find it here on the left side of the screen. If this story awakened something in you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave a like on this video. Share in the comments which moment of Sophia's journey resonated most with your own experiences. Every day we bring new stories that explore the infinite possibilities of the human heart. Stories of overcoming challenges, of reconnecting with our roots, and of discoveries that transform destinies. We await you in the comments to continue this conversation about how small encounters can completely change the course of our lives.